Hey guys, it's Miss Johnson. I just wanted to take a few minutes and go over the diagrams that I passed out last week and just give you the high points of the things that I really want you to focus on. I apologize I can't zoom in any closer on this, but so as I'm going over this, make sure you have your diagrams in front of you so you can see what it is that I'm talking about. First thing I want to draw your attention to is these two vocabulary words here, systemic circulation and pulmonary circulation. So those two words, the systemic circulation refers to the blood that's oxygenated, that's leaving the heart and going out to the body. And so mine's orange, so all of mine here that's orange represents arteries primarily that are going to carry oxygenated blood out to the body from the heart. And then the pulmonary circulation refers to deoxygenated blood as it returns to the heart and then the lungs to pick up oxygen. And so primarily when we're talking about the pulmonary circulation, it's the veins. So systemic would be arteries and pulmonary would be veins, largely. So there's a whole lot of arteries and veins here. You only need to know a few of them, so I want to point out the important ones that I want you to know. So again, I said the systemic circulation carries oxygenated blood away from the heart. And so we'll start here from the heart, this arch right here, and that's the aorta or the aortic arch. And so you can't see it here, but there's three branches we'll see later. But that aortic arch is really important. It carries the oxygenated blood out of the heart and is going to be the primary way that it gets to the rest of the other vessels. So the arch there, and then you can see the aortic arch, and then down here that aorta kind of continues down to the lower body. And this part's not labeled, and I want you to go ahead and label this. So that big vessel there that travels down the abdominal cavity, so that's the abdominal aorta. So go ahead and label that and draw a line for it. It's not labeled on your diagram, but add that to it. So the abdominal aorta right there. So the aortic arch and then the abdominal aorta. And then we can see down here in the pelvic area where it splits to feed the lower body and the legs. And so right here where it splits, this is kind of where the coxa is. And remember when we talked about the coxa in the region with the ilium and the iliac crest? Well, here, this is the common iliac artery. So that word makes sense there since we've learned the vocabulary of that region. So we've got the common iliac artery, and then down past the common iliac artery down into the upper leg, we have the femoral artery. And so we know, again, from the skeletal system, that's the femur. And so that big, large vessel supplies a whole lot of all the oxygenated blood to the leg and then the lower leg as well. So moving back up, so we got the aortic arch, the abdominal aorta, the common iliac artery, and down the femoral artery. Going above the heart, we see the carotid artery up here. So the carotid artery is going to supply the head, mostly the brain, with all the oxygenated blood that it needs. So that carotid artery is super important. And then traveling down this way, we see the brachial artery down here in the arm. And so when we learn the muscles in the arm, we talked about the brachial region. Well, this brachial artery is what that's named after. And so when we talked about the brachialis and the brachioradialis, those two muscles, that's that important artery that feeds the arm. So if we come back then to the heart and look at the pulmonary circulation, it's going to carry deoxygenated blood. You see that on the diagram, that circulation, both the pulmonary and the systemic, lie side by side or front to back all throughout the body. And so from the upper region here, so we see, actually we'll start here with the Vena Cava. So here's the superior Vena Cava and then the inferior Vena Cava. And so those are the two vessels that are going to bring the deoxygenated blood back to the heart. So the superior and then the inferior Vena Cava over here. The superior Vena Cava, this large vein that comes down from the head region. So we talked about the carotid artery supplies the brain with all the oxygen that it needs. And then that jugular vein is going to bring that deoxygenated blood back to the heart. That's the superior Vena Cava above the heart, and then the inferior Vena Cava is going to bring that deoxygenated blood back up from the lower part of the body. If we look out this way, we know that across this region you have the clavicle, and so the vein here is the subclavian vein. So that word makes sense since we know that the clavicle is there. We can see that word part making sense there. And And then going down through the inferior vena cava, we see, okay, there's the common iliac artery, but then we also have the common iliac vein. So right in that same region, we have both the artery and the vein. So the common iliac vein, that's going to feed all the deoxygenated blood from the lower body back up. So I think I've hit all of the vocabulary here, the veins and arteries that I need you to know. Yes, there's a whole lot of other ones, but those are the most important ones to focus on. Moving on to the next page of your diagram packet, you have these diagrams here. And so we're only going to focus on the two that I have circled, and really just understanding what they represent. This one up here at the top, we've already talked about blood and its components, so I feel like we've already done that. Just down here is really just a vocabulary word, the word fenestration, and it talks about it up here in the reading passage. Fenestrated capillaries have openings or windows in the walls. Continuous capillaries do not. So basically, fenestrations are little holes that are going to allow things to move in and out of that vessel a little bit more easily. And then I'll just quickly talk about this with the valves, and we'll talk about valves more later. And I don't think this is a great diagram, but valves are important in veins to keep blood flowing in one direction. But we'll talk more about valves later. Over here with the artery, I want you to pay special attention to the fact that this artery is lined with smooth muscle. So smooth muscle being very important. We've talked about the vessels, the importance of maintaining homeostasis where they constrict or they dilate to reduce blood flow or increase blood flow, both for temperature control and then stoppage of bleeding after an injury. So this fact that there's smooth muscle around these arteries is an important homeostatic device that helps us to maintain temperature and slow blood flow when we need to. The other important thing here is this diagram, and just understanding the level of organization from large to medium to small, and then back again from small to medium to large. And so if we think about the vessels that leave the heart and carry oxygenated blood, so that's the arteries, and the arteries subdivide into smaller vessels called arterioles, and then those arterioles divide into smaller vessels called capillaries. And so as they release their oxygen into the tissue and pick up nutrients and carbon dioxide, then they're going to come back into the capillaries and then condense to form larger vessels called venules, and then even larger vessels called veins. So from large to medium to small, and then back again from small to medium to large. And so this area here being the capillary bed, that's the important area where all the action takes place, where all the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide and nutrients takes place. Here, this little area right here, that's a valve, just like kind of talked about up here, and we'll talk more about this later, but you notice that it's in the vein, and basically it's going to allow one-way blood flow so that the blood doesn't backflow when the heart's at rest, or when there's, remember we talked about systole and diastole, so when the heart's in diastole, so the blood doesn't go backwards. All right, and then on to this diagram. So a whole lot here, and again, hopefully you've labeled yours, and if you haven't, make sure you get that done before you listen to this. But with our diagram here, it's important to start looking at the path of blood through the heart. And so it's not a bad idea to go ahead and draw in the arrows as I have here. Thinking about the song that you have to memorize, I'm going to walk you through it. And again, thinking about how the song relates to that path of blood. So the song starts out, the right atrium's where the process begins, and so it's there, where the CO2 blood enters the heart. So it comes in through the superior vena cava here and the inferior vena cava there. So the right atrium's where the process begins, where the CO2 blood enters the heart through the tricuspid valve, so that's right here, the right ventricle, the pulmonary artery and lung. And so here it's coming up through the pulmonary artery, and right there's a valve, the pulmonary valve. Okay, so the right atrium is where the process begins, where the CO2 blood enters the heart through the tricuspid valve, the right ventricle, the pulmonary artery, and lung. You can imagine a little lung out here. Once inside the lung, it drops its carbon dioxide and picks up its oxygen supply. Then it's back to the heart through the pulmonary vein. And so that's this area right here, the pulmonary vein. we have them both on the right and the left side, and that's true for both of this. So back to the heart through the pulmonary vein, the atrium, the left ventricle. And so here's the left atrium and the left ventricle. And even though the song doesn't specify, there's also a valve here, just like there's a valve on this side. But this is the bicuspid valve or the mitral valve. It goes by both names. So again, back over. So from the once inside the lung, it drops its carbon dioxide and picks up its oxygen supply. Then it's back to the heart through the pulmonary veins, the atrium and left ventricle. And so if you think about it from that point of the song, if we were to move on, so it's going to pump out of the left ventricle and then out through the aorta. And again, we see a valve up in there, the aortic valve. And so here's the 3 branches of the aorta from the top, and you can see it looping down as part of the abdominal aorta there. Anyway, so that's a overview of this heart diagram. Make sure you're working on learning both the sections of the heart, so the upper and lower, so the atrium and the ventricles. Make sure you're learning the valves between them, so the tricuspid and bicuspid valve, and then the vessels and arteries that are bringing blood to and from the heart. Hope this helps. I'll talk to you guys soon. Please email me with any questions or concerns that you have along the way. I'm available. Talk to you later.